The Iron Age boys are back from the event. I'm here with, obviously, me, Cinder, Ford, Perplexity, Synthesist, who we call Fatty, Uncephalized, and Yasukeh. And we had a great time.
Yes, we did.
It was very interesting. A lot of interesting people, all sorts, all kinds. So it was a cross section of the entire society. There were physicists and business owners and ship posters and a couple of artists and craftsmen, finance guys. I mean, I could go on, but I'd just be listing economic specialties and it would be boring. But yeah, otherwise, great time. We're going to talk about some of the talks quickly. It's not going to be our focus. Our focus is really going to be on, and stop me if I'm wrong, boys, interaction, the validity of community, and some of the other aspects that we weren't necessarily expecting. It was full of a lot of love and camaraderie, and there's a lot to be said about attending a group event of such a size. It was a little over 100 people where you can let your guard down. I never expected it to be that spiritually fulfilling. I'm physically exhausted, but spiritually fulfilled.
There should be a powerful qualifier there where there was a selection process of the people who attended. So you can't just have anybody attend. It's important to know or have an idea of who to select for.
Much like recent Discord server projects, a barrier to entry can be helpful to the quality of the participants.
Yeah, you picture the people that are in the comments sections being at the convention where they just say whatever they want. But in real life, people don't act that way. Everyone was super polite and really accommodating and nice.
I think the request to dress in a formal or semi-formal manner actually helps a lot with that. It gets everybody in the right civilized mind frame.
Yeah, so the first talk opened up. It was Academic Agent via video uplink. Does anyone want to sort of take the overview of that?
Yeah, so Academics Agent's speech was really the thing that set the whole tone for the conference, I think. Everybody respects Academic Agent's opinion, of course, and that's because he's a very intelligent person. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to show up because of the vax mandate, but he outlined a lot of the popular political formulas that's part of our right-wing circles. He noted on the different factions such as America First, the Stop the Great Replacement crew, the Christ is King Christianity crew, the Return to Traditionalist view. And then he also posited his own political vision that he thinks everybody can unite under. Because a lot of these people do unite and they do overlap, but he thinks that there needs to be a little bit more of a vision that everybody can get underneath or can confederate around, and that is clear them out. Now, clear them out is, of course, a famous line from that Bowden speech that we all like to spread as a meme, and it was repeatedly said over and over again at the conference. But clearing them out, of course, he qualifies it. This isn't necessarily violence, but it is a complete shutdown on the political system from the leftist point of view until we can figure out just what exactly is going on. It's a effort to make sure that not only our guys are in there, not necessarily just through infiltration, but that we get our own soft power and we basically forego a lot of the institutions that we normally would want to be a part of, such as like universities or NGOs. He's saying like we should be starting our own and going through with that. But this formula of clear them out is something that, people even like Q-tards could agree with. They think that they think that we're underneath like a swamp of satanic pedophile elites, which, granted they're probably correct, but they would have a hard time disagreeing with the principle of clear them out.
There was a strain of that later on that was brought up that was possibly an adjunct to that, which is the idea of you don't have to go in and sweep them out of their institutions if you simply de facto make their institutions no longer relevant by what other people sort of framed as a soft secession or a de facto secession. You don't declare war on the U.S. You just cease to recognize their authority in any real way, and the power of their institution simply collapses because you're no longer supporting it.
Well, that was the thing. That was the other theme, was parallelism, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically what you're referring to, where we just create our own institutions instead of trying to take over theirs.
Right. I think it goes one step further than that, though, even, which is that you can undermine an institution without taking it over.
Yeah, but the structures, like for instance, he gave the example of universities. Like sometimes the structures aren't conducive to what you want to do with them. And the language, and it's better to just like form it from the ground up instead of trying to repurpose something that's already there.
Yes, agreed.
Right. A point that was brought up during several speeches later in the conference was that these institutions no longer serve their initial purpose, and they no longer serve our purposes. Such as with universities, the original purpose was information passing along and basically elite formalization. And they do that, just not for our purposes. So trying to capture them would be a massive endeavor that just wouldn't work for us.
And given that there were a ton of talks, we don't want to spend too long on any individual one. So
yeah, those are the main points, and a lot of this stuff is reiterated later on in
Right.
The conference. Now, that being said, there is a conference book. You can buy the book. It's pretty expensive if you want to be a part of that sort of understanding of like what's going on there. But yeah, there was a lot of good stuff that came out of the conference, and the speeches were very good.
I think you mean it has a very high value, is what you meant to say.
That's exactly what I was going to add, because a lot of these speeches are going to be more impactful read than they were delivered for a myriad of reasons that we are not here to address today. So after Academic Agent, Ryan Turnipseed, the turnip merchant, the new kid on the block, came up and talked a little bit about regime replacement. Does anyone want to address Turnip's speech? Okay, moving on.
So Turnip had a very interesting speech that went really hand in glove with Academic Agent's speech. The speech was an extension on the idea of not only clearing them out, but also what can be done to formulate institutions that can be useful for essentially clearing them out. But he very much said that there's a problem with the phraseology "clear them out," where it sounds like, it sounds like the Sam Hyde bit, we're just gonna kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And that is explicitly what we're not aiming to do. We're trying to make this soft, very peaceful, if possible.
Well, and then the trouble comes from, because they're going to go somewhere after that. Like if you don't take the Hyde position, they're going to go somewhere. So it's not like they're going to disappear. They're just going to reorganize elsewhere.
Yeah, that also goes into the Machiavellian lesson about if you are to clear them out, the only two other options are to completely reintroduce them into the society by biting them off, or completely getting rid of them. Those are the only two options. If you take half measures, you will breed resentment, and that is not good for you in the long term. And Turnip did also mention that replacing a regime or removing a regime is dangerous in the sense that although you remove a regime, what comes after it may not be as good or better than the previous regime. Because what can happen is the death of innocence, which we want to avoid as much as possible. And two, like I mentioned earlier, that worse regimes can replace them. So even though we may not like the current regime and we have great resentment towards it, we have to keep in mind that throughout history, things can get worse. And we should be careful on removing the lamppost, so to speak.
Yeah, so after Turnip was a guy named Not Me, Not You, who I wasn't terribly familiar with, but apparently he had a very quick, very concise, straight to the point piece. Correct?
Yeah, he was mentioning, I think he was the one that was talking about it, like the marches in Washington, D.C., and how, they show up and say, like, these are our streets, we're not going anywhere. And then they are not their streets. And then they just go home the next day and they're still the same streets. They haven't accomplished anything.
And if anything, it's just a sign of weakness that they're going there when it doesn't matter. And then when it does matter, they're not there.
Yeah, it's like a display of power when you have no power. It's kind of
Yeah, the quote that was referenced later was the man who has to yell loudly that he's the king is not the king, right?
Yes.
It's also like the idea that Charlemagne brings up way later. When you occupy a house and you leave it, you still own the house, you still occupied it. But when somebody else comes in, it's not like they own the house. So when people are marching through these streets that they're not locals to, they're like pretending to own something when after they leave, everything goes back to normal. In fact, you sort of shake the hornet's nest and bring on more damage to yourself.
And the normies go, "Oh man, that was really cringe."
You know, his speech can be summarized basically about the meaning of what a dissident is, and that being dissident is usually a very hard thing to do in life, because we like to look at dissidents as these heroes, because these are the type of people we like to remember throughout history. And the thing is that a lot of dissidents, they become martyred. They meet terrible ends, and that this is a very difficult path and something to consider if you're going to go down this path.
There was a call to action that there's going to be a lot of sacrifice when engaging with a lot of our ideas and actually doing things that are meaningful. And that's what I did like about the vast majority of the speeches too. There was a very clear call to action as a theme throughout all of them.
And also a level of realism in understanding that this is not going to be some easy win. There may not even be a win. I mean, some of the talks definitely centered on the idea that there is no winning. There's only navigating the ruins, surviving in the ashes, right? That's kind of the whole conceit of the thing.
Yeah, and to bring that to not me, not you, this you have to have the will to endure this process, because we, in our current culture, we have an expectation of pretty quick and clear gratification, and there's going to be a lot of bricklaying before we can live, quote unquote, in the castle.
Yeah, that's what I liked about all these talks, is that they're not just plain theory and not just pure action. It's something synthesized. It's a praxis.
Everything in life that's worth doing is hard.
Yeah, so instead of just hoping for it, we have to borrow a term from Ibram X. Kendi, do the work. But this time we're actually talking about what work needs to be done versus just kind of this innocuous, nebulous, do the work thing, slogan. And to find out what exactly they're talking about, you're going to have to buy the book.
Does anyone have a good summary of what Clossington had to say?
Yes, one word, one sentence summary is that American archaeofuturism. That's basically it.
Yeah, he was more of just laying out and devising that idea of just American archaeofuturism as a potential viable path forward.
Does anyone want to unpack that word just for those who are not very familiar with Greek roots?
It's basically in regards to this book by Guillaume Fay from the New French Right about the synthesis between these sort of scientific elite and a large populace of basically rural farmers, and how we can apply that into the American type of idea. So what Cosington is doing is he's looking at it from an American pioneering perspective in combination with a Bronze Age mindset futurism perspective, and how we need to master techniques to really escape the longhouse of this sort of matriarchal society.
Well, and then there was we had another fella that I'm not really familiar with, and I heard from quite a few people that they weren't terribly familiar with, but he was, I hate to use the term pickup artist.
He was a self-described pickup artist.
Okay.
He would describe himself as that.
Yeah, he was kind of interested in some of the aspects of modern manhood from a self-described alpha point of view.
This was definitely the odd talk out for me in terms of just general fit with the rest of the speakers, which isn't to say that it was not valuable, but it was very different in tone.
Yeah, he basically comes from the PUA sphere, and he tries to apply those lessons to the political sphere. So his talk was basically about things you need to have in order to be a man. And it basically boils down to 1, physical presence, 2, social acuity, 3, money, and 4, frame. It's pretty much muscle, game, money, frame.
Yeah, and this was something in particular I want to highlight. Number 2, the social acuity. He called it game, but I don't love that term. But there is definitely something to be said about a lot of us need to get out and socialize more and hone the skill of social interaction, work out all the kinks so that we can come across more healthy, or actually be more healthy.
It's like what was talked about in another talk, is that ideas don't really matter unless you have a tool or a method to actually use them. Like the charisma to get the ideas out there and make them be a real thing in the real world.
And get other people to follow you to execute them.
Exactly.
Right. So
Yeah.
his talk was a little bit strange, and yet it still provided a lot of tools and a lot of perspective on saying like, hey, you all don't have all of these things. Like there were people there who had money, there were people there who have the frame, but there were people there who just didn't have the social acuity. There were people there who didn't have the physical presence. I think one of the buffest characters there was Yasukeh, and you know that's what we're trying to do with our the 10 podcast on the Iron Age Archive. We're trying to work and make it at people actually not only presentable but highly capable as well. And that's what I think the takeaway from Red Hawk was, is that you need to be a highly capable person.
It shows, it gives more validity to everything that you say when you are a well presented, respectable person.
And Red Hawk did show some respect to Yiz by offering his time to let her speak. And she basically took off after the frame narrative and used that to give us language tools to counteract this magic weapon of racism. So instead of saying something's racist, you counter that with anti-Western, anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-male. So it makes it clear what racism actually means in the American context.
It's a really excellent, better strategy than saying, oh, well, they're the real racists, right? You immediately go on the attack of, no, I reject that frame. And her thing was racism is an anti-Western, anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-male slur. You shouldn't use that word. I have a lot of thinking to do about that whole frame. I appreciated it.
Well, and it kind of disarms the postmodern redefinition of racism as prejudice plus power. And it just makes it pretty easy. It's like, oh no, you're just anti-white. Like,
Well, it hijacks it
yeah,
because if the institution is against whites, then they have the power, right?
right. Yeah, exactly.
It makes these supposed oppressors into victims, which they actually are, because like Yiz said in one sentence, there can be no atonement for a transgression not committed.
It's like giving us a head start in the oppression Olympics.
Right. And what's really fascinating is the book that Yiz speaks out of, which is Go Free by Jason Cohn or Kuna. The book itself is actually, I've read it, so I have a little bit of a leg to stand on here. It's a very useful book full of rhetorical tools that allows you to fight against a mindset of self-hatred. It's a unique book that I haven't read from people in any of our spheres that will allow people to basically break out of mind shackles and help other break out of mind shackles too. I think that if you're not familiar with rhetoric, you absolutely should pick up this book.
Then we have Anglo Ortho.
It was a great talk, a very philosophically based talk and he ties it back to Christianity. It's going to take 5 to 10 minutes to get through like what he talked about to really understand. But I think it's worth doing that. I'm not sure if we want to save that for when he releases that video of his speech himself. I'm not sure what we want to do here.
I don't know. I think we'd probably be best off letting him summarize himself because there is a lot there. But just to say that it's very rooted in a spiritual approach, as a lot of the talks were, which actually Radlip commented on also, that he really appreciated that it was a very spiritually grounded meeting of people. It was not just ideas; it was spiritually serious was the term he used, and Anglo Ortho was definitely in that vein.
Well, and his talk was referenced by everyone that went after him.
I
Well,
don't
not
know if there
everyone,
was one. Yeah, there might have been one that didn't, but everyone basically agreed. I think that was the consensus that his was one of the best.
Yeah, so if you guys have the opportunity, please go watch his speech. It is well worth a watch.
Absolutely.
and if you have the means, please buy the book where you can read it to your children and their children's children and their children's children's children.
Very good.
So yeah, another good speech that got a lot of attention and a lot of people talking was Radical Liberation, who's an old schooler in the AA sphere.
And this was definitely a high point for me, and it was basically an overview of his most important points of wisdom that he and his wife could kind of put together as a list, a bullet point list of little vignettes and things that they've learned through their life that they can pass on. And they are very impressive as a couple as well as individuals. Mrs. Radlib was there with him, and I was very glad he brought her. I know I personally had a good chat with both of them, and that was a high point for me just personally. So I'm not going to go through the whole list of wisdoms that he passed on, but if anybody had one or two that they wanted to put off as a high point.
I think one of the best high points that he talked about, and this does tie into our Become the 10 podcast on the IronAgeArchive.com and also on our YouTube channel, is he specifically said that God uses seasoned men. And
Yes.
seasoned men in this talk was a very, very straightforward principle. It's just like, we're all young. Everybody in the room was basically under 40. With most people being, 20 years old. He basically gave the wisdom that, it's okay to actually like develop yourself and develop a lot of structures. And there's going to be a lot of hardship to actually becoming a fully developed person. And once you're seasoned, then you're easily a lot more useful to good principles and good uses.
And that younger phase of your life is the period during which you should be receiving wisdom from people who have gone through their seasoning already, so that you can more fully pass through your own seasoning. And he gave the really the biblical pattern of passing through the quote unquote years in the desert, whether that's literal desert or just some long period of trial that can seem unending before you attain your position in life. And that's a pattern in the Bible and in just historical figures generally, that they often spend decades not seeming like they're getting to where they're going to eventually go, and then finishing their process and becoming a great man.
Yeah, what's more about wisdom through learned experience than it is through just theory and knowledge through books. He was mentioning that good and evil is learned through practice, not through the idea of good and evil.
Yes.
And that you have to practice things like patience as well. And the way to do that is by not avoiding situations where you're going to be tested. Your patience is going to be tested. And his wife he was mentioning that his wife is a very patient woman, but she wasn't patient in the beginning. She learned how to be patient through having their millions of babies, essentially. That's how you do it.
Yes. Mrs. Radlib put off a very motherly energy throughout the entire conference. And she even had an interesting opportunity where she got up and talked to us afterwards, which was sort of an interesting experience that was sort of unplanned for, but still came out. She basically just said, like, men take charge. It was a very inspirational speech, if a little bit avant-garde and ad hoc. So
she gave a few more thoughts on that theme in the co-stream she did with Radlib earlier today, I think.
Yes,
definitely
excellent.
recommend listening to that conversation if you haven't yet.
Yeah, excellent stream.
Something that stuck with me was how Radlib talked about the last European, and I connected that with academic agents' idea that we cannot be de-ashed. Once you lose your innocence, you can never have it back. And I think about that in contrast and as a combination, because that last European, he had a certain way of acting, a certain way of being. And we living through the ashes, we can act only a certain way. But with wisdom and experience and the ability to gain new virtues like patience, who we are now and who we can become is something I really think a lot about now.
Well, and the one thing that really sticks with me is referencing the times that God would send men into the wilderness, how it would be like he did that with the Jews when they left, the Hebrews when they left Egypt, and they wandered, obviously they had their problems, but they wandered the wilderness for 40 years before they were led in to where they were meant to go, the promised land. And this in Christian spheres is something that people talk about when you're going through a hard time. Like, that is the process of seasoning. That's, Moses spent time in the wilderness and was seasoned there. And then was he able to come fulfill God's purpose for him. And so for us, like, going through the hard times tempers you, seasons you for the right time. Same thing with Joseph, right?
Creates
Like,
strong men.
Yeah, Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers and spent 15 years in a prison after being falsely accused. And then he became the second most powerful man in Egypt during a famine. And it was his planning, his logistics work that saved Egypt from that famine.
And the formerly unsung groundwork that he laid before it came.
Absolutely.
Also, a wild McNukes appears.
Hello, how's everybody doing?
Good, good. We're about halfway into it.
The last point on Radlib, I think that crisis and emergency are a myth. The impulse to act rashly is almost always unwise. I think that's a really important takeaway. And he sort of ended on that, and it was a good thing to end on. It's always just an excuse for someone to exert power over you. It's never real.
Yeah, and it does feel like the doors are closing in, the walls are closing in on us. So I do have the desire to act quickly, and perhaps that is a rash reaction. But yeah, so then the distributist came up in a whirlwind of everything we've grown to expect from him in his talk about the leftist vision versus pure unreality. Is it worth trying to reconnect ourselves with our lefty friends at this point? Is there any common ground anymore?
Well, I don't know if it is worth it, but it's become a bit of his mission, right? So if he's called to try, then he's called to try. I don't have any lack of respect for that.
Especially when it comes to the topic of family members, because from my own personal life, I have a lot of family members who don't agree with me politically or don't even know what I think about. So Dave's plight is very familiar to me too. And his entire speech was very interesting because he really showed that, the left does not have a vision that is realistic whatsoever. It has no ability to be authentic. It has no ability to actually live a real life. It's always going to run into like completely illogical things.
Well, and I think for me, the biggest takeaway of the talk that I think was an important point was that it's not just that they run into impossibility and illogic, it's that their vision must be impossible and illogical. Otherwise, it isn't a leftist vision.
Yeah, it's important to have an understanding of what they're reaching for because some of us start off initially as leftists. We have to keep in mind that if the regime does change, unless we're willing to completely throw them all out, clear them all completely out, we need to bring them back into the fold. And we need to find the common points of interest of what they're reaching for. I think the one word that it seems like that everyone can agree upon, left and right, is that we're all reaching for something cozy, for a type of feeling.
So maybe if we make the world cozy enough, we can overcome their impulse to destroy reality.
Well, the only ones that are tearing things down are the ones that are reaching for power. There's a lot of people, and I know a lot of people like this, that they're on the left, but they want the same things, but they don't have the same solutions or they don't have the same ideas about how to get those things. Everyone wants to live in like peace and be happy, but they might not see what's going on around them. The ones that are tearing down are just merely grabbing for power, and that's not everyone.
I'd characterize those as the deceived versus the deceivers, I think is the way they're on the same side, but some of them don't realize why.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if they got their ideal world, they'd still try to tear it down.
I think that there is a recognition, a mutual recognition on both the left and the right, that there's something wrong with the modern world. And then that where both sides are trying to come at it from two different starting points or perspectives. So a lot of leftists see the modern world and they say, okay, so it must be because of white hetero patriarchy capitalism, because they don't have the alternative vision that where we're coming from. We don't have the same kind of foundation of facts. And I mean, a lot of us would be leftists if we hadn't stumbled upon a few websites, right?
Some of us probably were.
You can kind of think of it that way.
No comment.
Same.
Yeah.
We called all of ourselves out.
Yeah. A lot of the like lefty, the ideal lefty world is something that they idolize is like Harry Potter. But Harry Potter is like a traditional British boarding school. It's about as trad as you can get. But it's like you kind of need that framework of rules in order to break the rules.
Right,
Like-
in order to have something to buck against, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then they did a live recording of the Cigar stream, correct?
Yep. They went over the book Why I Am Not a Liberal, by Bowden. I'm not going to try and summarize that. It was long and very involved discussion about a book. So
Well, they would have posted that, right? Or
no, that was
nice.
an exclusive, I believe.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Or
They
a
may post that eventually on a channel.
yeah.
They just
So
have to blur the faces,
Okay.
like they did with the. There was an unpopular opinions at the last event,
Right.
and they blurred the faces. They also failed to blur it the first time and kind of face doxed.
Well,
and
and
then
you know,
took it down.
that blurring of the faces thing is kind of an interesting segue into the prudentialists talk, because he really hit the go out and meet real people and use your real name, which is something that we were all in the car, the group of us that went together, we're all talking about like, oh, what are we going to do? And very quickly in the car, we all just dropped the screen name thing and went with our first names because the screen name thing felt inauthentic.
When you're talking to a person saying like, "Oh yes, hello, I'm Cinder. Yes, hello, I'm Uncephalized," it feels very strange.
Oh, it's very strange.
Wasn't it strange initially dropping it too, though? Because I kind of know you guys very fondly by your screen names. So wasn't it strange to drop that initially?
I went back and forth. Like, Fatty is a pretty easy nickname, so it's fun to call Synthesist Fatty.
And I think he prefers that too.
I mean, Yasukeh is an idea. He's so much more than just one man. So it's
it's a force
easy.
of nature.
It's easy, but then some of the guys are staying here at the Cinder Mountain studio from where we're recording, and I can't introduce them to my family as
Fatty.
yeah. Well, I mean, even now, like, my brother and my dad are calling him Fatty. So
Yeah, that name just sticks. It's perfect.
yeah, but the 2-year-old is asking where he is by his first name. So
Yeah.
that's kind of funny.
Yeah, where's Mommy Milker Enjoyer? Where is he?
42069.
So yeah, but Prudentialist, I think, was right on the money with just being like, we need to go out and meet people and use our real names and own it, because I think I'm coming to a realization is like, they're coming for us anyway, even if we're 100% adhering to the regime's desire. Like in France, they just turned off 4 million vaccine passports because they want people to go out and get their booster sooner rather than later. Their passports were good for another like 6 months and they just shut them off. So understand that we're getting to the point. I mean, there is a certain amount of appropriate OPSEC, but they're coming for all of us anyway, regardless.
Yes, and so the only way you can be in any way prepared for that hard time that may well come soon is to be networked with real people that you know in real life.
And
that was a
you
theme.
trust.
Yes, that you trust deeply, and that was a theme that was returned to talk after talk after talk. Was this, and that was part of the reason why the event wants to be a live event, right? In-person event, because you have to put names to faces and put your hand to someone's hand and shake their hand and look in their eye in order to truly trust them, right?
Yep.
I don't know about you guys, but nowadays I'm actually more worried about doxing myself to people on the right than actually people on the left. I'm not that worried about Antifa coming to my door. Like, that used to be one of my biggest fears in 2017, but nowadays I'm more afraid that I'm going to say something that offends a bunch of guys that have nothing to lose. If I say something like that punches right, and I'm more afraid that they're going to end up sending a SWAT team to my house.
Interesting.
I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
I can't say that occurred to me in that way, but I think that fear is probably something that is going to be played upon to try and keep you from connecting.
Right, which really goes to show that we get so disconnected. It's sort of like a road rage situation where you have a disconnect fundamentally from the other people around you because you have that multiple layers in between everybody. Like, I saw a interesting post by one of somebody in my circles, and it was basically just like every single thing that you interact with online is all in your head. It's not real. It could literally just be an imaginative exercise by you. You could be like in a coma and thinking, you could be hallucinating voices until you know that it's real, until you know something that like you can touch it. It's not real. And this sort of disconnect leads to a sort of paranoia, a schizophrenic paranoia that most people really shouldn't be living with. It's true that this paranoia is really the mind killer. It kills the mind about like, yes, I should go meet up with people who actually think like me in real life. Like if you just take that statement, I should meet up with people in the real life in real life who think like me, that on its face as a statement is like a, well, no, duh, you should do that. You know?
Yeah, and to that fear, and the reasonability of that fear, what actually happened when we all went and stood in a room for 3 days? We met a bunch of delightful people, developed a rapport, made some friends, and made excellent connections, right?
Yeah, like you stop being this atomized individual that the potentialist uses the term digital deracination. Like I went there before I was just this fat avatar. When I went there, I became a white person.
Honorary.
Well, and there's stuff I want to go into the future because I really don't think the white identity thing is the tack we want to take. It's not the tack I want to take.
It seems like a lot of them have Christian ideals. That was like a really
Yes.
strong point.
Christian identity would be much more desirable than white
Yeah.
identity.
Not the Christian identity in the official sense. Christian identity is, I disavow it.
Oh, sorry, not as a slogan. I mean, like just the idea of
No,
that.
no, no. There's actually a thing called Christian identity,
Yeah.
and this is sort of a side tangent.
I
and it's
forgot
bad.
that when I said it. I don't mean that.
Christian identity, small I.
Yes.
Well, it's preferable because it's, in our circles, like we've got some non-white people, and there were, a good amount of non-white people there. It's still majority white, but big surprise.
That identity thing actually reminds me of something that Mrs. Radlib said when we were talking to her outside in the hall. Was that she and Radlib have basically disassociated themselves from a personal identity of even being Americans at this point. They are literally just Christians and anarchists. That's all they are as an identity. And the rest of everything that goes with being a United States citizen and voting and being an American is no longer important to them.
And there's an ortho take on this too, which is that in the Orthodox Church, we have Greek Orthodox, we have Russian Orthodox, we have the Antiochian Church, we have all of these ethnic identifiers. But at the end of the day, we're all in communion with one another, and we're all Christians, and we all believe the same things. So, like, you don't have to completely lose your identity in Christianity, but at the same time, we have to recognize what comes first.
It still becomes the primary identity without washing away your individuality.
Yeah, it's all about hierarchy.
Yep.
Taking the Christian ideas, we should probably talk about 21st Reaction. He had a very interesting speech. He talked about Catholicism and real life miracles that were verifiable and provable. And I think a lot of people forget about that. There's a very real presence of God, not only just in the world, but I felt it at the group meetup too, which is it sounds a little bit wee woo, but there was a very somber, very spiritual presence there.
Yeah, in modern times, like the modern scientific paradigm tries to deny all that and kind of strips that away from us. So it makes us appear like we're crazy if we talk about that kind of thing. But there was a time in history when all of this stuff was just taken for granted. If you talked about a spirit in the room or God's existence, all these things would be unquestionable.
Yeah, it definitely was a very interesting spirit that we were a part of and that didn't go away. It was sort of consistent, peaceful, and calming throughout the entire thing. Even in the evening times when things got a little rowdy, it was still very jovial, and there was a lot of camaraderie there. You'd expect, 100 white men doing it up at night. Like there's gonna have to be at least one fight, right? Nothing like that.
And I would imagine it was quite a big contrast comparing that to a typical party that you have in the suburbs.
There was an absolute level of decorum and expectation of behavior from everybody that was just unspoken. It didn't need to be made explicit.
Well, the funny thing was that it was really easy to have a conversation with pretty much everyone there. Like everyone has read the same kinds of books and has the same kind of humor, and it was just like you're just laughing or you're in a conversation that's super interesting. And yeah, it was surreal almost.
Yeah, even down to like our car rides. I haven't laughed that hard in a long time, and it was really enjoyable. Then we had Paul Fahrenheit, who is a writer. Do you guys know the publication that he writes for?
Praxarchy.
Praxarchy.
Praxarchy. Okay, yeah, and that's not someone I knew, but interesting guy.
Very versed in the Spenglerian or Spenglerian sort of view of history. Gave a barnstorming speech at times. Very, very passionate young man. Definitely wants to see some things happen, and I appreciated that about him.
Yeah, whatever the German term for barnstorming is. He was
It's barn.
barnstorming.
It's
Oh,
barn.
Yeah, from him, I certainly got a feeling that a lot of us share, which is the desire to be more, the desire to have an ideal and strive towards it and actually work towards being that. A lot of his character that he put on display, I could tell right off the bat, he didn't feel like he actually was that, but he wanted to be that and he was striving towards that. And it's one of those things that you look at and you are impressed not only just because of how far that we've fallen, but that somebody actually wants to pick up that mantle and become something better than what you already are. Now, his speech itself, it was a very interesting one because it basically was a call to action to become a 10,
yeah.
findable
A,
on Iron Age Archive or
A
on
bearer of the high culture. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your plug. That was terribly poor taste of me.
Yeah, a bearer of the high culture.
Yeah.
The interruption was a pseudomorphosis of conversation.
One might say I had a Faustian desire to seize infinite time.
I can kind of see an objection to the idea of high culture coming from certain people that I talk to. Bill might be an example of this too. Bill used to always say to me, I was born lowbrow and I'll die at lowbrow.
Well, it's not the high culture is in this conception is actually the superorganism of the culture that oversees all the sort of cultural doings of the people. It's like a conception of the culture that everybody carries. The high culture overall.
And
It's not exactly high versus low.
there is a place for lowbrow in
Yep.
in the cultural superorganism. Like he had a graph that basically put everyone where they're supposed to be. And I know a lot of us in this subsphere specifically want something more, want something great, and doesn't mean that Bill can't be a part of it, but somebody's got to sweep the streets.
Yeah, the Machiavellian perspective is that it's basically the high culture is the ruling class, or who people in the ruling class.
They're the vanguard of it anyway, but everybody kind of participates in it, even if they're not bearers of it. But yeah,
Right. His speech was, and I do recommend that somebody goes and reads it. It was a very interesting speech that ultimately said that you, no matter what your position in life, you have a part to play in this great narrative of our civilization as it moves forward in time. And that was a very inspirational thing. I talked to several people who found that it was conceptually incredibly white pilling despite the idea that everything's going to die. It was a very reassuring sort of idea.
there's always that conception that once you accept the inevitability of your death, it ceases to be a tragedy, right? It's merely an inevitability.
Which is a very Christian conception of it,
Indeed.
which I think worked perfectly into Fahrenheit's favor of that speech.
Which is funny because Fahrenheit was one of the only non-Christian speakers.
We'll get him. He can't resist forever.
I already have his my clause in, so
Good.
Very good.
That's like the Christian like has his claws into the pagan like this is like mental imagery. It's like
Well, we'll chop down his sacred oak before he's awake. Before he has his pants on.
and
He'll be
use
a
it to
Christian.
erect a cross.
Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't accept, we'll crucify him on it.
Speaking- and then
Problem solved.
yeah. Speaking of like that strong spirituality and that strong sort of perennialist view, Oros, who came on coming sort of with a almost Christian idea behind economics, and it very much informed his point of view about what he was talking about. But to really summarize Oros's stuff, it was very technical and it was very, I wouldn't say straightforward, but it was just basically like, yeah, we should actually think about economy instead of taking our cues from the mainstream.
Yeah, and this is something I really get down with too. In a lot of my corners of talk, I would really love to pay down the debt. It was a couple years ago that I just paid off all my debt, which wasn't that big to begin with. But it's really a freeing thing. Obviously, we have a problem with expenditure and people who don't own the money spending like drunken sailors, or like Congress, as they say. But the current economic system is absolutely bound to fail. Like, it's so absurd. There's no way it can keep going. So I would love sort of an all hands on deck 4 years of working as hard as we can. Everyone that can working. I mean, this is crazy, right?
Treating that as a wartime emergency.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, look, like our civilization is going to collapse, and all it's going to take is 4 years of sacrifice from the able-bodied to save it and pay off the debt.
But Cinder, don't you know that we can just debase the currency instead?
Yeah, I know, and that's part of the absurdity of it for me, is because it's so easy in my mind, and in the couple years after I paid off all my debt, like, a lot of my gains are in jeopardy because of the function of the current financial system.
Almost like you're being punished for
Yeah.
getting out of debt,
Yeah,
as though someone planned it that way. Almost.
right.
Yeah.
So, even though his stuff is really technical, I found it very interesting, being as practical as I am about finances and stuff like that. There definitely is a place for that conversation. I don't know if it was here necessarily, but I look forward to the continuation of kind of not boutique right-wing economics, but like a different approach from like the Austrian school, the Chicago school, where a lot of us are used to.
And we're working on a project where we're going to be talking about finance on our Become a 10 episode coming soon.
Coming soon. IronAgeArchive.com.
So last up on the slate was Charlemagne, who I thought gave a very good talk. It was very practical and uplifting in a way to end the formal event. He was talking a lot about the difference in lifestyle and futures between rural living, city living, and suburban living, and very much with the theme of navigating the ruins. He was talking about where are we now and what are we going to do.
Charlemagne has taken the Cinder pill as well, or the Trumpton-Sure pill, whatever, the rural pill. He and some of his cohort,
Yeah, he has a group together.
are going rural and are going to develop a rural property.
They're not just going rural into like what's already a small town that's kind of dying.
They're building something new, and I'm not sure how public where he's going is.
I'm not going to say where he's going. It's just undeveloped territory, uncharted lands.
And he had a strong vibe of like, we want to go out there because we want to go be men and like conquer the frontier, what's left of it, which was very cool.
Yes.
It's Atlantis.
Very Chad.
Yeah, it was very practical, talking about how just suburbs are not only do you have none of the benefits of rural, but you have none of the benefits of city. So suburbs are just the absolute most spiritually degenerated place to live in. And even though a lot of people here are people who wanted to live the rural life, there are some people who are just going to live in the city. So if you are going to live in the city, you have to make use of it, because there are a lot of benefits to living in the city. But if you're just inside all day on your computer, you can do that anywhere in the world.
Yeah, if you use the density of the city to make a large number of high quality contacts and establish a real network, you can be very powerful.
What I'm doing here, I have done when I lived in Brooklyn. It's the same thing. Like, know your grocer, know your pizza man, know your falafel guy, know your denizens, know your degenerates. Just know the community. Make friends with the homeless people, those who aren't completely insane.
Get to know your future subjects, right?
That's one thing. That's one thing that Cinder did a lot at the event, and just talking to the help extensively and making sure they were very well taken care of.
And they took good care of us.
Yeah, that's do that everywhere you go. And one of the things that Charlemagne was talking about was that opportunity for networking, and always to say yes to like social / networking opportunities.
Invitations. Always say yes.
Invitations, yeah.
And proffer your invitations generously in turn as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good talk.
Yeah, and it was a great way to end it. And I'll really quick just say, Charlemagne is one of my favorite guys in that sphere, and doesn't look anything like I expected him to.
No.
Yeah. The way
And
that I heard in the talk of the previous event, when people talked about what he looks like, they said he was the most Aryan. And yeah, it fits pretty well.
yeah, let's do our closing thoughts, unless anyone else wants to go in any direction.
No, I think we can close. I mean, for me, the takeaway was just real life beats endless Discord treadmill, right? And that theme came back over and over again. Putting faces to names, talking to people face to face. It gives you that spark of that little friction between humans that creates the new idea and the next action. And I think that's really important.
It's a really good case study to see that even though this group is full of young men who watch YouTube videos, like that it's not hypothetically the most impressive pool to watch at. There's still so much value there, and all it needed was a little bit of a live event to connect it. There's so many people with different skills who want to work on things, but they just don't have they don't know what to work on. They don't have any sort of connections to get something started. And so live events like this are just so valuable for getting that done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be the same for everyone who attended it, because we can watch these videos on these concepts that they presented online and get the same effect to a certain degree. But what you really get out of going to the event is like seeing them in person and, you know, connecting with them like on a deeper level than you would just over a comment section in a stream or something like that.
Yep.
And just like seeing what they're going through, and people are a lot more able to like talk about their personal life too when you're talking to them in person. Like no one's, you know, people were telling me where they lived and everything, like, you know, and what they go through day to day. Like that's not anything you would get online.
Yeah, and that's the difference between a parasocial and a social relationship, right? And we're at events like this, you build actual social relationships.
Oh yeah, and I want to double on that. In that 99% of the contacts I got were full names and phone numbers. Like I'm not walking away like, hey man, find me on the JQ server. I'll be the one posting all the cookie memes. It's like, nah, man, this is where I live. This is what I do. Here's my name. You know, let's talk. Hey, you guys want to do like an impromptu meetup early summer? Like we're going to this section, and you know, so to double on Uncephalized point, the in real life experience is so vastly superior to what we're used to in the online sphere. I don't know that I'm going to be able to go back.
It's real world building coming soon on the Iron Age archive.
So
Return to Tardation.
So to really pick up on that point, yeah, it's real life interaction is just something that all of us have been deprived of, and we didn't realize that it was such a textured and flavorful option for most of us. And every single person at this event has the potential not only to become a 10, but to become a very good 10. They every single person there basically could be a seed planted in their region where they become like a local elite. And that's my call to action for anybody who went there and who listened to this. And I actually put a post on my Telegram channel about it. Going forward, we're working with some of the best material ever given to us. And
Yeah.
there's no reason to despair, because even if I might be a pessimist in my own downtime, this event almost made me a romantic optimist.
Excellent.
That's cool to hear.
Yeah, the one major theme or the one major meta narrative I got from all these different talks and from the event itself, from interacting with people, is this idea of owned space by Bronze Age pervert. I saw very exemplified and even sort of talked about in a roundabout way through all the different speeches. Like how Turnip Seeds, he talked about this idea of decentralization, of everyone have their own group. Or Clossington talking about how we need to escape this lawn house, or any other talks really. Everyone's really honing on this idea of own space and how we're going in real life to be able to let down our guards so we're not constantly on the defensive, constantly under attack of all these political narratives. We can just be human because it's our space. And when you have your own space, you can finally cultivate and develop yourself into something much better.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier in one of our conversations today that you don't like using the term safe space, and I don't either, but it is a similar concept where we're not constantly under attack here. We don't have to watch our back for whatever reason.
Well, so maybe instead of a safe space, that's our space.
Oros kept going to the La Cosa Nostra, our thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and I think it's 100%, 100% valid. Yasukeh, you want to give a final thought?
We're all gonna make it, bro.
We are all going to make it.
I'm very optimistic about the future, and I think we all should be.
Also, eat your eggs raw.
Yeah. So really quick, this is sorry. Having Yasukeh look over your shoulder really changes your diet. If he's always there, if he's always there
Shame-based diet.
watching, like we sat down to a grubby, terrible Chinese meal, and just having Yasukeh there inspect everything we were eating.
By nose and by texture, and then he would like taste it a little bit, like spit it out.
Yeah, we all walked out of there having eaten about 1/8 of the food.
No, I still ate mine.
To be fair, you still ate it. You just felt bad about it.
I just felt bad. I felt shame.
It did feel like a brick in my stomach afterwards, though.
The food at the event might as well have been prison food, honestly.
It was pretty bad. That's definitely a major complaint.
So we just went to the store, got 2.5 dozen raw eggs, and just I would be eating it at lunch, and just everybody would be coming up to me asking me about raw eggs, and so I just raw egg pill everybody.
Well, no, let's put that a little more accurately. You placed yourself
Yes.
specifically, strategically, right in front of the lunch line. So
Yeah.
that everyone had to walk past you,
Facing
and you
it.
stood there with your perfect posture making Vanna White gestures over your raw eggs the entire time.
Yeah, offered raw eggs to people. A lot of people slunked them.
It was amazing.
Nobody vomited, which was good.
Yeah,
Good surprise.
I learned to enjoy them.
Food was such a major theme there too, because Yasuke had his raw eggs and his carnivore diet, while Cinder, he basically was able to advertise the Iron Age archive through through a bunch of Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah,
that's
that
right.
was
Most
brilliant
pronged
strategy.
attack.
Courtesy of the
Well,
Iron Age archive.
Yeah, I want, you see a bunch of little girls, and their moms out there with their cookies, and your heart just melts. And also, it's like you got the opportunity to share something that's like cultural with people that may be from outside of the states or outside of the region, whatever. I know it's bad for them, but
Yeah, but spiritually, it's good for them.
yeah, and they went. I mean, they were gone that night, so
Yeah, they were.
So yeah, it's it's a gesture, and it's not Yasuke pilled, but it is important to get that one of many Iron Age archive plugs that we got in that auditorium, all guerrilla advertising style. So
Yep. We got a lot of people interested in the Iron Age archive in a lot of different ways.
yeah,
Absolutely.
It's the Girl Scout cookie to carnivore diet filmmaking pipeline.
So yeah, that's the episode. You want to close this out, Jeff?
Oh, from someone who didn't attend, it all sounds so cozy. It all sounds, and I think ultimately there's going to be something. Laurentian isn't here, but this is a shout out to Laurentian. There's going to be something mimetic about this. People start hearing the word through places like Iron Age Archive, etc. Once people start hearing about what the event was like and the atmosphere there's going to be something mimetic. And Cinder, you mentioned the heart melting. I think that kind of describes it as well, where the internet really does harden our hearts. It really does cause us to put on this big defense, and we're always fronting about how based we are, how cool we are, how knowledgeable we are. I think this idea of the melting of the heart or the softening is going to be something that's really going to be a prominent theme in the next few years, and it sounds like it's the beginning of that. And this is only the beginning, so I see so much potential here.
I certainly hope so. If you're listening to this and couldn't afford the event, I would encourage you to start saving up for the next one. I was told that it was being tentatively planned early summer of next year, 2023. So start saving. Those of you who can, please do buy the book and check it out. We're not sponsored. We're not affiliated. I think it would be helpful to the movement as a whole and to this event sort of sub-project, and would encourage everyone, again, if you have the opportunity or can make the opportunity, attend one of these events, because it's indescribable unless you attend.
And in the meantime, just go out and talk to people. Like, just find any kind of event similar. You'll be surprised at what you find when you go out and talk to people.
I mean, on Basket Weavers right now, there's a bunch of new people who joined Basket Weavers because of Edward Dutton doing a shout out. And so them being less familiar with the concept, they kind of don't get it yet. So they come in and then they start creating branch off basket weaving discords. Instead of actually trying to organize a meetup in their local community, they're saying, "Oh, you guys are in Canada? Okay, we should all go to the Canadian Basket Weaver Discord now to chat some more." So,
which is against the point of it. I will be doing a script and a speech on basket weaving, not only for our guys, but for the people in my life who I want actually talking to people. Because I have a lot of friends spread out across the country who I've directed to the basket weavers, and they're just like, okay, well, what is this? So stay tuned.
Yeah, and please do join us on ironagearchive.com. Join us in the Discord. You can find the link in the show notes of most, if not all, of our YouTube videos. We're also on Odyssey. Please join the Substack and engage in the process appropriately, because we're all going IRL now. So
We'll see you there.
We'll see you in the Iron Age.
The end.
Our civilization is in peril. The impending ruin is not a question of when, but how. And how can we navigate those ruins? Scyldings presents Strategies for Navigating the Ruins, the event book, featuring high-quality illustrations and essay submissions by the speakers. Steel your resolve and raise your spirits with a complete collection of the rousing speeches and sober pronouncements given by academic agent, distributist, Charlemagne, and many more. Visit the Scyldings website to secure your place among the Gilded Ashes with a copy of Strategies for Navigating the Ruins, the event book.